To tackle the question in front of you on the screen is not easy. Number one, because I do not represent the United Nations, even though I've worked as a staff member, as a scientist with the World Health Organization in Geneva. And second, because actually we have to define for ourselves, number one, what is the United Nations, and also what does it mean to embrace blockchain. In 2015, comes September, the United Nations General Assembly had endorsed 17 goals, which are supposed to take us on a journey that would bring our world to be a better one by 2030. These are, as was mentioned before, the Sustainable Development Goals. Each one of them carries a whole world of brave decisions, but also of complicated internal journeys with each one of these goals that, if attained by 2030, are actually going to really make our world a better place. I won't go through all of them, A, because you have a good source to engage yourself with each one of them. But I want to emphasize the fact that the Sustainable Development Goals are not just the titles they carry in those boxes in front of you. Each one of the goals has its very specific targets. For example, we talk about innovation, industry. We can see that the access to financial services is one of the targets, the specific targets of SDG 9. But that's not all that this SDG carries. It also carries indicators. For example, this one, the proportion of small-scale industries in total industry value added. So there is a way not just to have a more specific road within each one of the SDGs, but also a way to measure. If we know what has been the situation in 2015, for example, we could measure where we are in 2019, coming 2020, and definitely 2030. Another example, under energy. We have a target, which is to double the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency by 2030. How do you measure that? There is an indicator. It's the energy intensity that can be measured in terms of primary energy and the GDP. And the third example comes from a place or an area that I'm more close to, which is health. So goal number 3, which talks to health, talks about a target to halve the number of deaths and injuries from road accidents. We tend to think about development and health in the meaning of communicable diseases, AIDS, malaria, TB. But we have to recognize the fact, actually, that SDG 3 talks also about non-communicable diseases and other reasons for people to die or to be injured, including road accidents. We can measure that as well. The roadmap of the SDGs gives us a very clear way, well, it's not very clear, but a good way to also measure our progress. So there are indicators. And one of the things that I would like you to ask yourselves as we go with this presentation in the next 10 to 11 minutes is, what would make us be able to measure the impact of blockchain technologies, as we shall define them throughout this day, based on already existing indicators? And also, are we reinventing the wheel by trying to suggest that we might put other indexes, other measurement sources in front of the SDGs and blockchain, or use what is so easy, common, available, the correct and appreciated indicators as there are. But the basic question is, why do we need SDGs? Why did the countries of the United Nations, the member states of the United Nations, decided to endorse those 17 goals? It's because we are in front of tremendous catastrophes. It's not only the fire you see in front of you and the fact that India will overtake China as the largest populated country in the world very soon. 2050 is just around the corner. But it's also the fact that conflict, death, as you can see on the upper left side of the slide, with terror, with man-made and other catastrophes, are things that one country cannot solve for itself. One organization cannot solve for itself, and not even a regional approach. So it needed the world to come together to work on issues like the demographic challenge, including the two people in front of you with their backs at the center of the picture, which is the elderly population. We are actually seeing an increase in life expectancy. We are living in a country that we are very fortunate because Israel is one of the leading countries in life expectancy both for men and for women. So great to be an Israeli. But it's also with the challenges of what do we do when we become older. Not us as individuals, but us as the world, resources-wise, care for the elderly, etc. And also the inequality. The fact that 82% of the wealth of the world is held by 1% of the population is unacceptable to some. It's unbelievable to others, but it's definitely something that we need to deal with. So the world came together around the SDGs and decided on these 17 goals. And the question is then, what is the United Nations? Please don't try to even study the slide. It's very, very busy. But the number 193 is the number of countries with South Sudan joining in 2011 of the membership of the United Nations. The United Nations is not owned by Mr. Suarez. It's actually owned by its member states. And they are the ones who take decisions for, in a way, all of us. Just an example, what an ultrasound machine should look like and how it should examine women or men, what vaccination protocols are, is determined by a United Nations agency, in this case the World Health Organization. The World Bank dictates also a lot of things in terms of our financial markets, etc. So it's an area of many, many organizations, actually over 37 formal organizations that constitute the United Nations, and they are the driving force of the SDGs, no matter where you live, whom you govern, whom you listen to, or what's the type of governance you have in your own country. And the two locations that you see the pictures on the left side, Geneva and New York, are just indicative of the headquarters of where the United Nations main operations are operated of. But actually the United Nations is spread around the world and specifically with presence in less developed countries, or what we call low and middle income countries. So why is the United Nations embracing blockchain? I'll give you 6 answers to this question. The first one is that we are failing. We are dramatically failing in actually achieving the targets of the SDGs. And we are in great need for finding new solutions. Blockchain technologies offer new solutions for existing problems, some of which I've shared with you as the main directions of the world in terms of the catastrophes I've mentioned, and they could be overturned with good action. And you see some of the examples in energy, in equality, in education in front of you. I won't go all through the pictures, statements. The second reason is that there is a real need for UN agencies to address the criticism that is not new, but has accelerated in terms of the need for these organizations that seem to be very bureaucratic, inefficient, old-fashioned in the way they conduct business. And blockchain suddenly came as a wonderful opportunity to embrace and to suggest that perhaps here is the way that if the United Nations would take a lead, and as you will see also, listen to Hila that will speak immediately after me, these organizations are definitely looking at blockchain as one good answer to why they should exist. And actually, when we look at why they are embracing blockchain quickly, is perhaps also because of the need immediately to address those challenges with other directions of shortage in finance, which comes to the other slide in front of you. The United Nations lacks a lot of funding, and the interest to find on the high demand of new resources, blockchain and cryptocurrency as part of the solution is one other third reason for the embracing of blockchain by the United Nations. But we also have to recognize that there is a fourth reason. It has to do with the United Nations is not just buildings. It's actually one of the largest employers in the world, definitely in the social impact side of the world. And there is a new generation. It's the millennials that also seek for opportunities job-wise in the United Nations. They bring new vibe into these very bureaucratic organizations, and they also bring new ideas about new solutions. They are also influence the organizations they work for, and through those influences, they became influences by themselves to absorbing new technologies. And perhaps another reason is that the United Nations is actually a great fit for blockchain. It's decentralized. There is no country called the United Nations. It's actually international. It's multinational. It's global. So the fit between the philosophies of the operations of the United Nations as an organ in our world and blockchain seem to be a good fit. And lastly, perhaps it's not that the United Nations is embracing blockchain. Perhaps it's blockchain that embraces the United Nations. And actually, there is a lot of interest of organizations, companies, private sector, obviously public sector, governments, to look into the United Nations as the opportunity of advancing and scaling up projects in blockchain that are happening in their own territories. We can talk then about how currently is the United Nations acting on the premises of the existing blockchain opportunities and technologies, which I termed blockchain applications. And I just brought a few to increase your temptation and interest perhaps to delve more and understand how this is actually on the ground. So not 6 projects, but 6 areas of maturing projects in blockchain that happen right now. The World Bank, together with the Bank of Australia, have issued the very first ever bond, blockchain bond. Through that process that is very common to offer bonds by the World Bank, there is the recruitment of new resources and new possibilities that were never before to be able to deploy in different projects that the World Bank is financing. In terms of identity, specifically personal identity, but also relating to land, UNHCR with refugees is using the iris scanning technology in order to provide a legitimate and for life identity to people who have lost their identity, fleeing out of conflict areas, Syria being an example. And this project has started actually very next door here in Jordan and scales up to other areas where refugees are needing to recap their identity and have no way to actually use a formal country identity that they have fled away from due to conflict. The supply chain story is very interesting, and it's one of the highlights of where the United Nations agencies and related organizations sees value in blockchain. There are several projects that are on the ground, and they are all to facilitate better trade. And because we have a whole fabulous speaker on this specific area that does not represent a United Nations project, I will keep short on this. Privacy and data are extremely important. And Wale has mentioned to us before one example of the doctor and the information of each one of us. Think for a moment about adding to the value of people that are currently outside of the economic circle a new asset. It's called data. It's called my personal data. Not my ID, but my blood pressure, the level of my cholesterol, the ways that I conduct sports and how they affect my not just behavior, but my physical tests. This is valuable information. We give it for free, definitely in this country, to our healthcare services. Not that they match our name and the data, but they use the data and they sell it to others. They make money from my data. If I'm living in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, in any other country that you'd classify as a low-resourced country, can I not now sell this data to whom I want if that data is important for them? So suddenly the issue of us being of control of our data is not just around privacy and the ability to have an income becomes another way for us to engage with the economic world around us. And lastly, smart contracts in agriculture, but also in other areas that are only possible through the blockchain technologies, offer a new dimension of improving the results of agricultural products, but also enables, again, if we connect it to economy, a way for me to sell corps that I have an overflow of to someone else that I could not do but through the blockchain systems. Same with energy. And we are in a public education type of an activity. Yes, the United Nations agencies are well versed and now invested in contributing to the public's understanding. Not only us as a public, but their own employees and managers to be able to fast move on the incorporation of blockchain technologies within the United Nations family. So that's the United Nations, but what does it mean to us, whether we are at private sector or civil society? Think for a moment about yourselves, the organizations you work for, and blockchain. Where could be the match? I won't give you the full answer, but several quotes which I think could lead us the way to understand how important the time we are living in right now is in terms of this particular innovation. The amount was mentioned before by Janet, 12 trillion US dollars. The 12 trillion US dollars and the 380 million new jobs are not waiting now, but we know from very serious reports like the one coming from the Business and Sustainable Development Commission report of 2017 and added reports that once achieved or coming closer to achievement, that will be the result of the SDGs. They will grow business to be in the trillions. They will grow jobs to be in the hundreds of millions. This is business. This is an opportunity. This is something that the blockchain community may want to pay attention to because it's all segregated around those three letters, S, D, G. We also know that the SDGs offer each one of us, through blockchain, new partnerships. So the United Nations, again, could be the mobilizer of a range of partnerships in a very impartial way also, which is part of the way that the United Nations operates, and to do that in a way that could enrich our own further engagement with new partners and new societies. The UN agencies could position themselves more clearly, and that's a quest for them, to support countries and other organizations to contribute to the SDGs and to identify their actions that could hinder progress. So it's not only to advance, but also how not to hinder the progress, and can definitely design on the premises of what they do anyhow, new packages for the business investors that could be meaningful on a return of investment that makes sense. And a final message, which I would like actually to read to you, it's a bit of a longer statement, which says that technology has the potential to drive a better, more sustainable economy for all, but only if there is a continuous dialogue between the innovators and society. Business is a bridge for that conversation. It can apply the capital and the skills needed to scale new ideas, taking them from the garage or the lab to where they have local and mostly scalable global impact. And I would like to end with a picture of smiling children. Well, they are the future, and hopefully they will be the immediate beneficiaries next to all of us from blockchain technologies and the SDGs. Thank you.